Hey guys, quick heads up about a free webinar you don't want to miss. It's titled From Severance to Security, and it's happening Thursday, July 24th at 12 p.m. Central. Whether you're navigating a layoff or just want to be prepared before one hits, this session is packed with must-know advice. You'll hear from two employment attorneys and Brenton, who will break down what to look for in a severance agreement, your legal rights and what's negotiable, how to stay financially secure during a career transition, and more. It's totally free and open to all. Just head to newmoneynewproblems.com/severance to save your spot. That's newmoneynewproblems.com/severance. We hope to see you there.
In this episode, we share snippets from our most recent webinar, From Severance to Security, Legal and Financial Tips After Losing Your Job. Let's get started.
Let's get some money.
From New Money, New Problems, it's the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen. Negotiating compensation, purchasing your first investment property, helping your family with money, the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. New Money brings new problems that require new solutions. Join us as we work through them together. I'm Brenton Harrison, and this is the New Money, New Problems podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. If you have been following along, you will know that this week we had our most recent webinar, From Severance to Security, and we were joined in that session by two friends of mine, James Crumlin, who is a very experienced labor and employment attorney from Spencer Fane. They have offices all over, but James is a good friend, and he's a person who I had counseled with multiple times when I've had clients or friends who have lost their job, and he's actually the reason, springing from those conversations, that we decided to have this session. And he introduced me to another colleague of his, Casey, the employment attorney, who is also an experienced labor and employment attorney and also in-house counsel for Acadia Healthcare in Nashville. So a wealth of experience that we had in the room for this webinar, and we went through a lot of great material. So it was just a really, really informative session. Now, this is a sample, a clip from that webinar. If you're on our email list, you get access to the full replays of our webinars. So this is about 30 minutes of what was an hour-long session. If you want to hear the rest, then you can have access to the private feed of our podcast by joining our email list. You can go to newmoneynewproblems.com/subscribe if you want to hear the whole session. We also will put information for both Casey and James in the show notes in the event that you need to contact them for their services or to simply follow what they have going on. They're both really great, really interesting people who have interests outside of what they do professionally. But I really think you'll enjoy this snippet or learn a lot from this snippet. Nobody enjoys hearing about what they need to do if they're laid off. So take what you can from it. Hopefully this is information you'll never need to use, but in the event that you do, it is definitely what you need to know. We'll keep the momentum going. The next question I will ask you is, are there any common mistakes you see employees or employers make in situations where layoffs or severance is involved?
I'm happy to take that.
Turn it on, James.
But one common mistake that I see with employees is that they don't ask enough on the front end, right? I think that when there is a severance package being offered, then you as the employee should have either an attorney working with you to make the ask, or you should make the ask yourself. Now, mind you, when you make the ask, you need, remember that little documentation that I talked about, that notebook, you should have that readily available so that if they say, well, why do you feel like you deserve 9-month severance instead of 3? Then you can point to this documentation and then the negotiations can begin. So that would be something that I would say that employees don't ask enough in those situations. On the employer side, one of the things that I find that's pretty common is that they don't have their documentation together. They want to go ahead and get rid of James, but they don't have the documentation that shows that James is a bad employee or James didn't perform well. they just have random email here and there saying, oh, you missed the deadline. Well, guess what? I may have missed the deadline, but I got you what you needed. So so it's usually on both sides of that. So that's what I commonly see.
Right. And I'll add, everything is negotiable. What's the worst that they can say? No. Like, oh my gosh, my feelings are hurt, right? Everything is negotiable. So from the employee side, as James said, if they're offering you 2 months of severance, go ahead and ask for a year. Because I'll say from the employer perspective, I sit in this seat to kind of make these decisions and negotiations on how much are we going to offer somebody. If it's just a one-off case where it's just one person, well, then we may offer them 2 months, but what if we put some cushion in there for 6 months just in case they want to negotiate, and we offer 2 months and they're like, okay, I'll take it. Okay, cool. We see 4 months of X, Y, and Z. So you never know what that employer has in their cushion or their back pocket to offer more. So there's nothing wrong with using your voice negotiating. Like James said, the best person who's going to advocate for you is you. So I always encourage people, make sure that you keep throughout the duration of your employment a laundry list of the great things that you have done for the company. So when they come back with that 2 months, you can send that email and be like, thank you for your offer. However, while I was here, this is the value add that I had for the company. This is how I see myself valued. And this is why I think that 2 months is way too low. Let's give me 2 years, give me 3 years. I mean, they're not going to do that. But hey, it's a starting point. And also on the employee side, thinking that if you get terminated, that the company is required to give you a severance. In the case of a termination, the company is not required to give you a severance, especially, like I said, if it's for work performance. However, if we're talking about layoffs, and this is a little bit of legalese, so I'm not going to hound on this too much. If you are within, like, there's so many employees that work there, the employer has to abide by what's called the WARN Act, and they have to provide you like 60 days written notice that, this amount of people were getting ready to be laid off, you're getting ready to be separated, or this reduction in force, a RIF, positions are getting eliminated. If the amount, it's a mathematical calculation as far as how, like, what that includes, the threshold of the number of people. I'm not going to get into it, but they're required to give you 60 days notice. Some companies, in lieu of a 60-day notice, they may just give you the 60 days of pay because they need to go ahead on and close down operations. So keep that in mind as well when we're talking about layoffs. When it comes to issues that employers encounter, employers, like James said, some of them don't really have good documentation. Also, some employers, they play onesie twosie with how much they are going to give people, and that can get employers in trouble. For example, an employer should, in my opinion, have a rubric that they use as far as, hey, if you've been working at this company for, I don't know how many years, for every year that you've worked, you get 2 weeks of severance, as an example, or 3 weeks of severance for every year worked. Because what if they have 30 people that they terminate, they RIF a position, it's 30 people that get affected, and they're following their rubric on how much people are going to be offered for severance based upon their seniority there at the company. And let's just say that, I don't know, Susie Q, who is a white female, she comes and she wants more that's given, and they say, yes, okay, we'll give you, instead of the 3 months, we'll give you 6 months. And then Jacob, who's a black male, he comes and he asks, well, hey, Susie Q got 6 months. I want 6 months. We've been here the same time. And they say, no, we're not going to do that for you. That can give the air of a race discrimination claim. That can give the air of a sex discrimination claim, all those claims that come in. So I always advise employers, if you're going to offer severance to folks, try to have a rubric that you have in place of what you can follow. And sometimes you can get off task with the rubric. I understand there's like one-off situations, but just so that you're applying that uniformly across the board to ward off any type of discriminatory practices.
I will add something that I encourage people to do when it comes to job offers, equity compensation, and severance, which is there is almost no scenario where a company issues an offer with the expectation that a person wouldn't counter. But like it's like it would be poor planning on
Yeah.
behalf of the employer. So because they gave you an offer with the expectation that you would counter, you need to counter no matter what. Find something to counter on. With equity compensation, I tell people to ask for more RSUs or more stock options or more salary. When it comes to severance, I'm like, to your point, if they offered you 2 months, ask for 6 months because there is likely some level of cushion. And I think that either when you're early in your career or you feel like, either because of your, gender or your race, that you need to just kind of shut up and just take whatever you're offered, understand it is always worth a counter because it is more art than science. And yes, if you try to counter 7 times, they may say, you know what, don't worry about it. But I have never seen a company say, you know what, don't worry about it after one or two counters.
Correct. I totally agree with that, Brenton. And a colloquialism that I always say is that closed mouths don't get fed. So you have to make sure that you at least ask, because the worst thing that anybody could tell you is no. And we've
Right.
all heard no once or twice before in our lives. So
Yeah. And if I'm already getting fired, a no is not as heavy as the firing. So I might as well, I might ask for as much money as I can out the door. So the next question that we're going to ask is, what are the first steps? And I'm definitely going to weigh in a little more here. What are the first steps that an employee should take once they're laid off?
With this question, are we talking about a layoff because a particular department within that company is shutting down or the position is getting eliminated? Or is that person getting like they're in an at-will state and they're just terminated maybe because the company feels, I hate when people say this, they're not a great fit for the
Mhm.
company, or for performance issues. Can you expound upon that just a little bit, Britton?
Well, let's go dealer's choice. So whichever you have the best answer for, let's go with that
So, so I'll say, and no one likes rejection. We're human, right? We have emotion. No one likes to be separated from a company. No one likes to be terminated. The first step I would tell an employee, breathe, relax. Because what you want to do, if they do offer you a severance, you want to be able to counter logically, not emotionally. You don't want to fire off an email that is like, you blankety, blankety, blank. I can't believe you blankety, blank. Now give me 15 months. At that point, like the employer's walls, defensive walls are already up, and they would be like, no, go kick rocks, right? As the quote says, you can win more. I think is it bees with honey than you can with vinegar, right? Breathe, calm down. If you need to go cry or punch a teddy bear, like just let it out. Go to James's capital workout, right? Let the stress out, the aggression out that way. And then when you get to a point where you can take some of the emotion out and have a logical conversation with your employer, I would say do that. If it is a position elimination, ask them, are there any other positions that are open within the company that I can transfer to before they totally cut off your employment? Maybe it is that increase in severance. Maybe it is, hey, I need insurance for my family. I have little ones, or maybe I'm having health issues myself. Is there any way that we can extend health coverage for another 2, 3 months? Think of some creative ways. If to talk with your employer to counter some of these things if you're getting ready to be laid off or terminated or separated or anything like that. James?
yeah, absolutely, Casey. I mean, if you're getting ready to be laid off, you want to make sure that you are in the best position possible. I mean, if it's a department reduction in force, then and the company just is bleeding money, and they're trying to shore up their resources, and they're eliminating a department, and they offer you X. Hey, same thing as we talked about. Look, if you're getting laid off and there's some type of compensation package, negotiate that. Go back and ask for more. Also, if they're offering some health benefits that along with that, then ask for more too. The worst thing that anybody can tell you is no, and or no, we can't do that. We could do this. So everything is negotiable. Nothing is off the table. Um, I would definitely encourage everyone to ask, to make that question, to ask the question, because you never know what you're going to get. I mean, I work with clients all the time, and you'd be surprised that the client says, "Look, James, I'm not going above X," but their X number is really not their final number. And when you get down to it, if there's some type of discriminatory animus or something else going on, then there is another number that they may be willing to do. You just have to ask. You have to figure that out. And the only way that you can figure that out is by asking.
Very
I
true.
will add something to that from a financial planning perspective. At some point you're going to get to the end of that severance offer, even if it's increased, right? There's going to be a period of time where they're saying, hey, your last day of employment is XYZ. And I always encourage people to try to map out from an employee benefits perspective, what are the benefits that I can take with me versus what are the use it or lose it benefits. So there are some benefits that you're going to be able to take with you. Your 401k, your 403b, that can be rolled over. You can actually leave it there if you want to. But there are other benefits like a dependent flex spending account, like a flex spending account, where it may not be able to transfer with you from one employer to the next. So, for example, we have people who have young kids and maybe they've been putting money into a dependent flex spending account to pay for summer camp or, pre-K tuition. Well, after that last day of employment, that may revert to the company plan. So there may be some dollars that you need to, hey, before that last day, go out and spend it, right? Because that's going to go away. We also see this where even if you are moving to a new health plan that, hey, it's not like we're going without insurance, you may not have the same coverage on that plan, or you may not want to do Cobra. So speaking personally, we've had experience where we always have, health insurance through my wife's employer. My wife's a marketing executive. And we have a little one. James knows our little one, and he has asthma and allergies. And like every other month, we are either in the ER or calling in a steroid or something of that nature. Well, there was a period where we switched from one plan to another when my wife switched jobs, where his allergist was not covered by the new plan. His inhaler was not covered by the new plan. So there were some things where it's like, hey, we actually need to call and see if we can stack up these refills and go to that visit with the allergist before we switch the plan. So it may be if you're switching dental coverage and are like, hey, that wisdom tooth that needs to be pulled, you might as well go ahead and pull it now because you're going to be starting over when you go to the new plan as well. So map out the benefits that you can take with you versus the benefits that you're going to lose and the dollars that you're going to lose. And if that means like scheduling like a last minute, primary care visit or specialist visit, that's something that you at least want to know before you lose those benefits. All right, let's keep it going.
Can I just add one more thing
Yeah,
to the
absolutely.
bottom? I didn't answer the bottom part. I told you, Britton. Listen, y'all. I gave Britton a heads up. I said I talk a lot, so so listen. The bottom question said, from an employer's perspective, what are the first steps the company takes when an employee is terminated? Y'all, this is what I always say to companies that I'm working with, or my own company that I work for, is when you have to give that news to someone that they've been terminated, they've lost their job, they go home and tell people who depend on them, hey, I've lost my job. And you have some people, thank you, Brayton, for bringing out the conversation about wealth and finance, who are living paycheck to paycheck. And if they're terminated, that next paycheck may very well be their last one, and they don't know what's going to happen thereafter. So I always tell them, like, make sure that you have crossed the T's. Yes, you have dotted the I's before you process that termination, number one. And then number two, once you process that termination, you need to make sure that, before you process that termination, that this whatever, let's say they violated a policy, that other people who have violated that policy, that they were terminated as well. Because the last thing you want on your hands, for example, if you're in a hospital setting and someone, a Black woman who is 55 years old, punched a patient in the face. I mean, yeah, that's zero tolerance for patient abuse and neglect. Yeah, she's got
What the
to
patient say? I'm joking. I'm joking.
go. So I work for a behavioral health care company where we work with patients who have like mental health issues. There ain't no telling what should they have said, right, to set it off. But let's just say that she's like, yo, there was a white female who was 22 years old who punched and kicked and cussed at a patient, and she got written up. She didn't get terminated. Like, although the termination was warranted for this person, if you didn't apply your policy uniformly across the board, well, then there goes your age discrimination claim, your race discrimination claim, your sex discrimination claim if it would have been a male. So just be mindful of that. So if the company is going to terminate somebody, make sure that you have everything set before you process that termination. And just know that, like I said, if you're going to offer a severance to someone, that, hey, just be ready for them to come back to counter or for feelings to be hurt and not to take anything personally.
Perfect.
One thing I 1000% agree with Casey. And another thing that I would just want to add is when I consult with my clients is that, when you get down to it and you're about to terminate that person, you want to have someone else in the room with you. You want to have either, if it's the manager and HR and they're the ones doing the termination, then you want to have more than one person in that room. You don't want to just be you and the employee. That's a recipe for a disaster. That gets to be a he said, she said situation. If it's if the genders are different, depending on who's doing the termination, there could be an harassment claim. And you're just literally sitting across the desk telling them that they no longer have a job. But if that door is closed and it's just the two of y'all, guess what? There may be a harassment claim that kind of comes out of that and it could be totally made up. But you definitely want to protect yourself in doing that by having someone else in the room with you.
Thank you. I'm going to pivot on this question a little bit. I'm going to answer it because there's some deeper questions for the sake of time that I want to make sure that I get you all's opinion on. So the question asks, when is a company required to offer COBRA coverage? Not going to get into that in per se, but one thing from a financial planning perspective that I see people not understand is COBRA, which is essentially your ability to continue the health insurance that you had from your previous employer. There's going to be a period of time that it's offered. It may be 18 months, depending on if you have some life experiences, you can extend that beyond 18 months. But there is often a disconnect between people understanding that if you don't want to pay for COBRA, which is almost assuredly going to be more than you were paying with your employer, you do have the ability to go on the marketplace and get a plan, even if it's not open enrollment. So I've seen people who have declined COBRA coverage and they go months without health insurance because they're like, oh, I didn't pay for COBRA. Well, this being the loss of qualifying coverage, it's a qualifying life event. So it allows you to go to healthcare.gov and sign up for an insurance plan, even if it's not technically open enrollment because of that loss of coverage. So we're going to keep going. And I do want to ask, this is the one that I wanted you all to really spend some time on. Are there any scenarios where a company is required to offer severance or any other benefits besides COBRA? So Casey, you kind of talked about like that 60-day notice. Could you expound?
So there's something called the WARN Act. It's a federal act. And then also the states have like their mini WARN Act, where if you have like so many employees, it is not just the number of bodies, it's like full-time employees. You have to like count the hours. You have to do like a 60 or 90-day look back to see how many hours even the part-time people worked if they would get into that threshold number of employees. And you're required to give those employees a 60-day notice to let them know, hey, we are about to shut it down. You're about to lose your jobs, and they have to give 60-day notice so that they're able to still work. But then if they need to apply somewhere on Indeed, or, just to go ahead and prepare. But there are some employers that are like, we're not going to be around for 60 days. We need to close like in 30 days. Well, then you just need to, sometimes they'll pay those employees a severance that's equivalent to that additional 30 days or that 60 days. It's like pay in lieu of that. So that doesn't happen like all the time, because you have to meet a certain threshold, but that's something to keep in mind. If you have key executive people who work for that particular company, and let's just say the company's going to close in 60 days, but they need to be around for another 30, 40 days to wrap things up if they're the CFO or something like that. Well, then the company can offer them an additional stipend or a severance package so that at the end of 60 days, they're not like, yo, peace out. They'll be like, it'll be compelling enough for them to stay to wrap up operations. That's on that point. And then also, are there scenarios where a company is required to offer severance? Yes, there are scenarios such as, what if while the person was working there, they were offered a retention agreement? And in the retention agreement, it says, hey, if the company terminates you for cause, then you don't get anything. But if we terminate you without cause, just because we want to go another direction, there's been a huge change in their job duties, like there's different reasons for without cause, well, then we'll pay you a year of severance. We'll pay you what the employer portion offset would be so that you can continue COBRA benefits for like a year. We will accelerate any vesting of stock. And when we talk about like accelerating vesting of stock, right, and you probably know way more than me in my limited capacity on that, but there are some plans that don't automatically allow for acceleration of the vesting of stock if you are terminated. But if you have a retention agreement or an employment agreement that calls that out, well, then yes, the employer has to abide by that at the time when it's time to get rid of you. So if you have a retention agreement or if you have an employment agreement, I would advise you, if you haven't seen it in a while, take it out, dust it off, get the dust off of it and read it to know what your rights are if your company's getting ready to terminate you. Companies should be the sophisticated party, but some companies aren't. They may have had you sign an employment agreement or a retention agreement, and they've had maybe change in leadership. There's been turnover, and it's at the bottom of somebody's desk, and they totally forgot about it. So just make sure that you review that as well.
Yes, for sure. And one thing that I want to add to that is with respect to COBRA. So generally a company is required to offer COBRA benefits if they have over 20 employees and and they have a group health plan, right? So that's one thing you also want to consider. There may be some other qualifying events like job loss, reduction in hours, death of an employee, divorce or legal separation, loss of dependent status, and Medicare entitlement. Those may be triggers that may allow you to get COBRA benefits. So you want to be mindful of that as you're kind of going down that path, that if you encounter any of these triggers, then you may be entitled to some type of COBRA offering from your employer.
That you all teed something up that we were actually going to talk about later, but I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We'll come back to some of these questions. But, one of the things Casey talked about was vesting and some of the things that you might be able to negotiate when it comes to just understanding your rights. So this was a question that I had put for later. It says, are there any forms of indirect compensation or comp that's already been accounted for that might be easier to leverage in negotiations? And one of the examples was I put staying on the company health plan or accelerating the vesting of equity compensation. And Casey brought this up, and the reason I wanted to skip to it is, if you all are not aware, I used to work at a firm that offered small business health plans. So, I would go through the process with smaller employers of figuring out what their rates were going to be. And in many situations, you're setting your rates for the year based on how many people are working for the company at the time you sign up for the plan. So in terms of how that small business was planning for costs, it's kind of already baked in to what they had planned for the year. So in terms of if somebody had come 6 months into the plan and said, hey, I got terminated, would you let me stay on the health plan or extend my benefits for 6 months? It may be something that the company has already accounted for. So even though you're asking for something that is all the money in the world to you, it's not new money to the employer. And it's something that's worth considering. We have seen scenarios where people have been offered an agreement where they don't work for the company starting maybe next week, but they're still listed as an employee for 3 more months so they can get one last, set of RSUs that vest. And the reason that that is something that you can ask for in some situations is this is not always the case in terms of, to Casey's point about like, well, it depends on how you were terminated. But a company cannot offer you at the beginning of an employment agreement restricted stock and just like put that money aside when it's time for it to vest. They have to separate those shares at the time of the signing. So if someone offers you 10,000 shares, they can't just find those 10,000 shares when you're supposed to vest 3 years later. They have to put them aside now. They're just not yours now. So we have told people, hey, it's not as if you're asking this company to go find new shares to grant you if you're asking for them to accelerate the vesting of your restricted stock. Those shares are already put aside. You're just asking them to accelerate the timeline of when they turn them over from their ownership to your ownership. So I would definitely look for things like that. So health insurance and equity compensation were two of the things that I thought of as a financial advisor. From an employer's perspective, can you all think of any others where it's like, if you ask for this, it seems like a big a deal. It's not that big of a deal to the company.
Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, so okay, I'm just going to give an example of someone who used total creativity. She was an executive at a company, and the company was going through a governmental investigation, and because of her position in the company, she had to be put on a blackout period where she could not like trade or cash in her stock. She couldn't do anything with the stock that had already vested because this was like going on for like 1.5 to 2 years where she couldn't touch it. Now, Brenton, like I said, don't mind my limited understanding of all that stuff, but let's just say like before that DOJ or governmental investigation, the stock was worth $85 a share. Well, towards the end of that blackout period, it was down to like $25 a share. So she lost out on some money, and they had they went through a RIF. They eliminated her position. She had a retention agreement that called for the acceleration of all this other stuff. So she was due the money, but she looked and she was like, "Yo, there's this huge deficit, and what I would have had I cashed it out or whatever 2 years ago, but because I was put on a blackout period and couldn't touch it, now this is what it's worth. So can you all, alongside with the severance pay of the salary and X, Y, and Z, put in what that delta is, what I missed out on?" And the company said, "Yeah, not a problem. We'll do it." And that was the first time I've ever heard anyone negotiate something as far as that delta goes and that reduction. So.
Yeah, that's very creative. I love that actually. And I think another thing too that is a form of indirect compensation is job placement. You could ask the employer if they will give you an opportunity to go to a placement agency and have them actually help you find another job, right? And so that is something that is common, especially as Casey mentioned, when you have somebody that's on the executive level or C-suite level, but even any employee can ask for that. Remember, the worst that somebody can say is no. So even if you're transitioning from jobs, just ask, "Hey, can you put me with a job placement service," and see if that particular person or agency can assist me with getting a job.
From New Money, New Problems, this was the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen.